Well, China has been amongst the most vocal critics of the U.S. operation to seize Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife from Caracas, demanding the pair be released immediately. Beijing has been a key backer of the Maduro regime, investing tens of billions of dollars in the oil-rich country. But where do events of the past few days leave China's ambitions and influence in Latin America? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Eric Olander, Editor-in-Chief of the China Global South Project. Eric, good to have you with us this evening. Really appreciate your time. Now, can you first give us a sense of how important Venezuela has been for China in terms of Beijing's aims to grow its influence in the region?
Listen, overall in South America, it has been relatively important, but by no means the most important country. It pales in comparison to China's interests, say, in Brazil, which is really the epicenter of Chinese engagement in South America, much larger, for example, than anything they're doing in Venezuela. But much more important, even than Venezuela and even Brazil to some extent, is Panama and access to the Panama Canal. And that is something that is of great concern to them now that the Trump administration is indicating that they want to try and block Chinese access to the canal. So when we look at Venezuela, it's important, but it's not in the top tier of the geopolitical hierarchy for China in that region.
Yes, but nevertheless, Beijing has poured tens of billions of dollars into Venezuela for oil for loans program.
Yeah, so between 2000 and 2023, the Chinese poured about $106 billion of loans. Most of that came in the early 2000s when they started what you indicated was these oil for infrastructure deals. They learned early on that those deals, and they did similar deals in Angola, really started to fall apart. And so by 2016, they started pulling back on the loans quite a bit. There's about $10 billion of loans still outstanding that need to be paid, and there's questions now whether that will be repaid. But at the end of the day, it's not an existential threat to China if these loans fall through. In terms of trade, we're looking at about $64 billion of two-way trade, not insignificant, but certainly not, again, existential if it falls through.
Yes. So much has been written, Eric, about how the arrest of Maduro and Trump's claims that the U.S. is now in charge there, how it may present a blow to China, both economically, but more importantly, geopolitically. Do you agree with that assessment?
No. I mean, we are literally 4 to 5 days into this crisis. We don't know what's going to happen. And listen, I'm old enough to remember when the first few days of the Iraq war kind of unfolded. And within 3 weeks, the U.S. took Baghdad and everybody said, mission accomplished. Remember that on the aircraft carrier? Today, let's kind of be sober about where we are. China is the largest buyer of Iraqi oil. So there are 35 different ways that this can go sideways for the U.S. And even to suggest that Trump is in charge, I think is an exaggeration. So also bear in mind, Trump's power in the United States is diminishing fast. He is a uniquely unpopular president, and he's facing midterms this November, and he could be politically bogged down in the U.S., where the U.S. gets distracted and loses its focus. So we could be in a situation next year at this time where there's an anti-American push in Venezuela that turns in favor of China. My whole point here is that it's just too early to suggest if it's a blow or not.
Yes, and
we just don't know.
Yes, but other signs pointing towards that, because it seems that Venezuelan leaders have no choice but to realign themselves closer to Washington, given what we've heard from the interim leader, who says that she's happy to cooperate with the Trump administration now.
Listen, that's where we are today. We have to separate some of Trump's rhetoric from the reality. He says a lot of things. We don't know how much of it is going to come true and how much follow through there's going to be. There is no infrastructure for U.S. power in Venezuela on the ground. So it's hard to see how that is going to be effective. And I think the Chinese are sitting in a wait and see position to say, let's see how this plays out. Again, 3, 6, 9 months from now, this situation is going to be very different than it is today.
Yes, and aside from the rationale that was given by the Trump administration to combat the narco-terrorist network in Venezuela, and aside from the oil that we know that Donald Trump wants to develop, do you see Trump's aims at regime change in Venezuela that was also partly due to its attempt to curb China's influence and growing power in Latin America?
Well, be careful here, because number one, that they said they weren't out to change the regime. They were just out to get Maduro. And very important. So I think that's an important distinction. And also on Air Force One this past weekend, Trump himself said he would let the Chinese oil flow. Now, today, as you reported, that they are blocking some, they want to block some of those oil sales. So we just don't know what the situation is. But let's bear in mind that if they cut the oil off to Venezuela, it's less than 5% of China's total oil imports. That can easily be made up from the Saudis or the Russians or the Qataris or the Brazilians or elsewhere. So this does not present any type of threat to China's oil supplies. At the end of the day, what's most important to the Chinese in South America is Brazil and the Panama Canal. And those 2 points right now seem to be stable, but we don't know for how long.
Stable, even though Panama did ditch the Belt and Road agreement with Beijing?
They did. Yes, ditching the Belt and Road Agreement was more symbolic, and this is not a formal treaty or anything like that. They didn't really benefit that much from the BRI, so it was more symbolic and optics, which is important. Don't get me wrong. It's important that they did that under duress. More importantly, though, are the two C.K. Hutchinson ports on the Atlantic and Pacific sides. And the U.S. is forced or trying to force a divestiture of that from the Chinese or from the Hong Kong conglomerate. China's pushing back on that. And now we have to see if Trump will escalate. If Trump escalates, that could jeopardize the April summit that the two sides have planned between U.S. and China. This is a very serious issue for the Chinese, and losing access to the Panama Canal would be a major strategic setback. And so I doubt that the Americans are going to push too hard ahead of the April summit. After the April summit, we're not sure.
Yes, and bringing this back to Venezuela, do you think perhaps quietly China, you don't see China as a country that would sit back and be doing nothing? It would be doing things behind closed doors. How would Beijing be assessing things at the moment on a geopolitical front, and how might it play its cards?
So you have to put this crisis in the context of the year that the Chinese have had with Trump, going back to January. It's been a year of near constant crises. Whether it's the trade war, whether it was the tariffs, whether it was the rare earths, I mean, you name it, let's go through it. Chip, sanctions and whatnot. So this is just one in a series, and they are very well primed for this. They're used to it now. Remember, they played the Trump administration very, very well during the trade standoff. They've gotten accustomed to how to react to him. And I think the thing that we're seeing is not to overreact. They're taking a very, very strong stance. In fact, as you pointed out, they are becoming the most vocal critic of what's happened in Venezuela, of anybody in the world, far more than the Europeans who are purportedly defending the rules-based international order, even more than what we're hearing out of Russia. So the fact that the Chinese are emerging as the most outspoken critic is an interesting tactic, and they clearly see an opportunity to rally global public opinion on their side, which I think is why they're doing this.
Okay, Eric Olander from the China Global South Project. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us this evening. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.